Welcome to a new video. Today, we've got a pretty tricky situation on our hands. Have you ever wondered what could lead someone to take their anger out on their parents when the real source of the problem is their adult sister who's fully grown and responsible for her own actions? Today's story will delve into the complexities behind just such a heated argument. Let's stick around to see if our main character was in the wrong or if their reaction was justified. Remember to like and share if you're keen to explore more stories like this one.
In the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, Ohio, where maple trees lined the streets and neighbors waved from their front porches, Laura Bennett was a woman on a mission. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden glow through the kitchen window of her modern two-story home, where she stood surrounded by mixing bowls, flour-dusted countertops, and the faint scent of vanilla. Tomorrow was her husband Mike's 28th birthday, and Laura had been planning a surprise party for weeks. Every detail had to be perfect. The cake, especially, was her pride and joy, a 3-layer chocolate masterpiece she'd spent hours perfecting, from the moist sponge to the intricate buttercream frosting she planned to pipe into delicate swirls. Mike, with his love for homemade food and aversion to processed ingredients, deserved nothing less. Laura, at 26, was the kind of person who thrived on order. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her hazel eyes scanned the kitchen with the precision of a general preparing for battle. She'd sent Mike off to spend the day with his brother under the guise of a fishing trip, giving her the house to herself to transform it into a festive haven. Streamers were ready to be hung. A playlist of Mike's favorite classic rock songs was queued, and a spread of snacks, homemade guacamole, fresh salsa, and bite-sized sliders was meticulously planned. But the cake was the centerpiece. Laura had spent days sketching designs, settling on a pattern of elegant rosettes that would make Mike's eyes light up. She could already imagine his warm smile, the way his laugh lines crinkled when he was genuinely happy. The only wrinkle in her plan was her family. Laura loved them dearly, but they had a way of complicating things. Her older sister, Amy, 28, lived with their parents, Tom and Susan, in a modest ranch-style house across town. Amy had always had a complicated relationship with food. As a child, she'd been bullied relentlessly for her weight, her shy demeanor making her an easy target. Food became her refuge, a way to soothe the sting of cruel words, and that habit had followed her into adulthood. She wasn't obese, but her lack of self-control around anything remotely appetizing was a constant challenge. Laura had seen it countless times, Amy sneaking extra servings at family dinners, hiding candy wrappers under her bed, or finishing an entire tub of ice cream in one sitting. Their parents, kind-hearted but overly permissive, had never set firm boundaries, believing love meant indulgence. Even now, with Amy living under their roof, they did all the grocery shopping and cooking, leaving her with little incentive to change. Laura had called her parents the previous week, asking them to come help set up for the party. "Just you and Dad, okay?" she'd said, her tone firm but gentle. "I need to keep things under control." And Amy, well, you know how she gets around food. Susan had hesitated on the phone, her voice tinged with guilt. "We can't just leave her at home, Laura. It wouldn't be fair." Laura had sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Mom, it's not about fairness. It's about making sure everything goes smoothly. There'll be snacks, drinks, and the cake, and I can't be babysitting Amy while I'm trying to set up." Susan had promised to talk to Tom, but Laura knew better than to trust that promise completely. Now, as the clock ticked toward noon, Laura was putting the finishing touches on the cake batter when she heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. She wiped her hands on her apron and peered out the window, expecting to see her parents' familiar blue minivan. Sure enough, there it was, pulling up beside the neatly trimmed lawn. But as the doors opened, Laura's heart sank. Out stepped not just Tom and Susan, but Amy too. Her blonde hair tied back loosely, her eyes scanning the house with a mix of curiosity and unease. Laura opened the front door, forcing a smile. "Hey, you guys made it?" she said, her voice brighter than she felt. Tom, a broad-shouldered man with a graying beard, grinned and held up a bag of decorations. "Thought we'd bring some extra streamers," he said. Susan, petite and perpetually cheerful, hugged Laura tightly. "The house looks great already, sweetheart. You've outdone yourself." Amy lingered behind, clutching a reusable tote bag, her expression uncertain. "Hi, Laura," she mumbled, barely meeting her sister's eyes. Laura's smile tightened. "Mom, Dad, can I talk to you for a sec?" She led them into the living room out of Amy's earshot. "I asked you not to bring Amy," she whispered, her voice low but sharp. "This is Mike's day, and I can't afford any hiccups." Susan's face fell, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her cardigan. "Laura, we couldn't just leave her at home. She wanted to help. She's family." Tom nodded, his tone matter of fact. "She'll be fine, Laura. Just give her something to do." Laura bit her lip, swallowing a retort. She didn't have time to argue. Guests would start arriving in a few hours, and she still needed to frost the cake, set out the snacks, and hang the decorations. "Fine," she said, exhaling sharply. "But please keep an eye on her, and tell her not to touch any of the food until the party starts. I mean it." Her parents exchanged a glance, the kind that said they thought she was being overly dramatic, but they nodded. Back in the kitchen, Laura handed Amy a stack of paper plates and napkins. "Can you set these out on the patio table?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. Amy nodded eagerly, happy to have a task. "Sure thing," she said, her voice brighter than before. Laura watched her go, then turned back to her cake, trying to shake the unease settling in her chest. She mixed the buttercream, the whisk scraping rhythmically against the bowl, and told herself everything would be fine. Amy was here to help, not to cause trouble. Right. As the afternoon wore on, the house buzzed with activity. Tom strung streamers across the patio, his booming laugh filling the air as he recounted stories from Mike's last birthday. Susan arranged chairs in the backyard, humming an old Beatles tune. Amy moved quietly, setting out plates and folding napkins with surprising care. Laura kept one eye on her sister, noting the way Amy's gaze lingered on the bowl of tortilla chips on the counter, the tray of sliders waiting to be grilled. "Focus, Laura," she muttered to herself, piping a practice rosette onto a piece of parchment. The buttercream was perfect, smooth, creamy, just the right shade of ivory. She couldn't wait to see Mike's face when he saw the cake, but as she stepped away to grab more piping bags from the pantry, a faint clatter from the kitchen made her freeze. She turned, her heart sinking as she crossed the threshold. There was Amy standing in front of the open fridge, a spoon in one hand and the mixing bowl of buttercream in the other. A smear of frosting glistened on her chin, and nearly half the bowl was gone. Amy's eyes widened as she saw Laura, and the spoon slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. "Laura, I didn't mean to," Amy stammered, her voice trembling. Tears welled in her blue eyes, and she clutched the bowl like a lifeline. "I just wanted to taste it. It was so good, and I couldn't stop." Her words tumbled out, a mix of guilt and panic, and Laura felt a wave of emotions crash over her: anger, disappointment, and a sharp pang of sympathy she didn't want to acknowledge. For a moment, neither sister moved. The hum of the fridge filled the silence, and Laura's carefully laid plans seemed to crumble like a poorly baked cake. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, footsteps approached from the living room. Tom and Susan appeared in the doorway, their faces shifting from confusion to concern as they took in the scene. "What's going on?" Susan asked, her voice soft but wary. Amy's tears spilled over, and she set the bowl on the counter with a shaky hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Laura's jaw tightened, and she turned to her parents, her frustration boiling over. "This," she said, gesturing to the half-empty bowl, "is exactly why I asked you not to bring her." Laura stood frozen in the kitchen, her eyes locked on the half-empty bowl of buttercream frosting, the creamy swirls marred by Amy's spoon. The air felt thick with tension, the hum of the refrigerator a mocking reminder of the silence between them. Amy's tears streamed down her cheeks, her hands trembling as she wiped at the frosting on her chin. "I'm so sorry, Laura," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean to ruin it. I couldn't help it." Laura's chest tightened, a storm of emotions swirling inside her. She wanted to scream, to demand why Amy couldn't just listen, why her parents couldn't respect her one simple request. But the sight of her sister crumpled vulnerable and drowning in guilt stirred something else, a flicker of pity she didn't want to feel. Before she could find words, Susan stepped forward, her motherly instinct kicking in. "Oh, honey, it's okay," she said, reaching for Amy's shoulder. "It's just frosting." "Laura, you've got plenty left, don't you? The cake's still fine." Laura's words hung in the air like a storm cloud, sharp and heavy. The kitchen, once filled with the warm scent of vanilla and the promise of celebration, now felt stifling. Amy stood frozen, her tear-streaked face flushed with shame, the half-empty bowl of buttercream a silent accusation on the counter. Tom and Susan exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions a mix of defensiveness and guilt. Laura's heart pounded, her carefully planned day unraveling before her eyes. She wanted to scream, to demand why her parents couldn't respect one simple request. But the sight of Amy's trembling shoulders held her back just barely. "Laura, calm down," Susan said, stepping forward with her hands raised as if soothing a skittish animal. "It's just frosting. The cake's still fine, isn't it? You've got enough for a crumb coat." "Right." Her tone was placating, the kind she used when smoothing over family disputes, but it only fueled Laura's frustration. "A crumb coat." Laura's voice rose, incredulous. "Mom, this isn't about a crumb coat. I spent hours planning this cake, sketching designs, making sure every detail was perfect for Mike. And now half the frosting is gone, and I don't have time or ingredients to make more." She gestured to the clock on the wall, its hands ticking closer to the arrival of the first guests. This was supposed to be special, and now it's ruined. Amy let out a choked sob, covering her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry, Laura," she whispered. "I didn't mean to mess it up. I don't know why I did it." Her voice broke, and Laura felt a pang of guilt twist in her chest, but her anger was too raw to let it take hold. Tom cleared his throat, his practical nature kicking in. "Look, why don't I run to the store and grab some of that pre-made frosting, problem solved." He reached for his car keys, already halfway to the door, as if a tub of Betty Crocker could erase the tension in the room. Laura shook her head, her hands clenching into fists. "No, Dad. Mike doesn't eat that stuff. You know he avoids high-fructose corn syrup and artificial flavors. I made this frosting from scratch because it matters to him." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "And honestly, it's not just about the frosting. It's about the fact that I asked you, both of you, not to bring Amy, and you did anyway. You knew this could happen, and you didn't listen." Susan's face hardened, her maternal instinct flaring. "Laura, that's not fair. Amy's your sister. You can't just exclude her from family events because of her struggles. She's trying." She glanced at Amy, who was now staring at the floor, her shoulders hunched. "You need to be more sensitive. This isn't easy for her." Sensitive Laura's voice cracked, her frustration spilling over. "Mom, I've been sensitive my whole life. I've watched you and Dad let Amy do whatever she wants. No rules, no boundaries, because you felt sorry for her. And now here we are with a ruined cake and a party that's falling apart. Maybe if you'd set some limits years ago, we wouldn't be in this mess." The words landed like a slap. Susan's eyes widened, and Tom stopped in his tracks, his keys dangling from his hand. Amy let out a small gasp, her hands dropping to her sides. For a moment the kitchen was silent, the weight of Laura's accusations settling over them like dust. Then Susan's voice, low and trembling, broke the stillness. "That's enough, Laura. You don't get to blame us for Amy's choices. She's an adult. We can't control what she does." Laura opened her mouth to argue, but Amy's voice, small and shaky, cut through. "She's right, Mom. It's my fault." She lifted her head, her eyes red but resolute. "I knew I shouldn't have touched the frosting. I told myself I wouldn't, but I did it anyway. Laura has every right to be mad. She turned to her sister, her expression pleading. I'll fix it, Laura. I promise. Just tell me how. Laura stared at Amy, caught off guard by her sister's sincerity. For years, Amy's apologies had been fleeting, followed by excuses or avoidance. This felt different, rawer, but Laura's anger still simmered. There's no time to fix it, she said, her voice softer, but still edged with frustration. The guests will be here in an hour, and I've got to figure out how to salvage this. Tom stepped forward, his tone conciliatory. Come on, Laura, we're just trying to help. Why don't we all pitch in? We can make this work. But Laura shook her head, her resolve hardening. I need to handle this myself. Just, please finish setting up the patio and let me focus. She turned back to the counter, picking up the half-empty bowl of frosting, her hands trembling with a mix of anger and exhaustion. Her parents hesitated, then nodded, retreating to the backyard with Amy trailing behind. Laura stood alone in the kitchen, the silence ringing in her ears. She looked at the cake, its bare layers mocking her vision of perfection. There was enough frosting for a thin layer, maybe, but none of the intricate rosettes she'd planned. She could feel the weight of the day pressing down on her, the pressure to make everything perfect for Mike to prove she could pull this off. But now all she could think about was how her family had let her down again. Outside, the backyard was coming together. Tom hung the last of the streamers, their bright colors fluttering in the late afternoon breeze. Susan arranged the snack table, carefully placing bowls of chips and dip, her movements deliberate as if to distract herself from the argument. Amy sat on a patio chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the ground. She felt the familiar churn of shame, the same feeling that had followed her since childhood, when kids at school called her names and she'd hide in the cafeteria with a tray of tater tots. She wanted to disappear, to undo the moment she'd opened the fridge and picked up that spoon. But more than that, she wanted to make things right. I'm going to the store, Amy said, suddenly standing up. Susan looked up, startled. What, honey, you don't need to do that. But Amy shook her head, her jaw set. I messed this up, Mom. I need to fix it. Laura needs more butter and powdered sugar. I can get it. She grabbed her purse from the table, her movements quick and determined as if she could outrun her guilt. Tom frowned, glancing toward the kitchen. Amy, maybe you should stay here. Laura's pretty upset, but Amy was already heading for the gate. I'll be quick, she called over her shoulder, her voice firm despite the tremor in it. Susan started to protest, but Tom placed a hand on her arm. Let her go, he said quietly. Maybe this is what she needs. Amy's walk to the corner store was a blur. The late summer air was warm, the sidewalks lined with kids riding bikes and neighbors watering their lawns. She kept her head down, her sneakers scuffing against the pavement. The store, a small family-owned market called Miller's, was only a few blocks away, but for Amy, it felt like a marathon. She hadn't done something like this. Taken initiative, tried to fix a mistake in years. At home, her parents handled everything from grocery shopping to paying the bills. She'd let herself become dependent, not because she wanted to, but because it was easier than facing her flaws. Inside Miller's, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Amy scanned the aisles. She found the baking section, her hands shaking as she picked up a stick of butter and a bag of powdered sugar. The labels swam before her eyes and she second-guessed herself. Was this the right kind? Did Laura need unsalted butter? She stood frozen, clutching the items until an elderly cashier with a kind smile approached. Need help, dear? She asked. Amy nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm trying to fix something I messed up. For my sister. The cashier's eyes softened and she helped Amy choose the right ingredients, even throwing in a small bag of chocolate chips for good luck. Back at the house, Laura was in a race against time. She'd spread the remaining frosting as thinly as possible, covering the cake in a smooth but underwhelming layer. It wasn't the showstopper she'd envisioned, and the thought made her throat tighten. She glanced at the clock, 30 minutes until the guests arrived. The sliders needed to go on the grill, the drinks needed ice, and the playlist wasn't even started. She felt like she was drowning, and the lingering sting of her argument with her parents didn't help. When Amy returned breathless and clutching a plastic bag, Laura barely looked up from the sink, where she was washing dishes with more force than necessary. "I got butter and powdered sugar," Amy said, setting the bag on the counter. "I thought, maybe you could make more frosting." Her voice was tentative, hopeful, and Laura's first instinct was to snap that it was too late. But something in Amy's expression, earnest, vulnerable, made her pause. She took the bag, her fingers brushing against the cold butter. "Thanks," she said curtly, turning back to the sink. Amy lingered, then quietly slipped out to the patio. The next half hour was a whirlwind. Laura whipped up a small batch of new frosting, but it was barely enough to add a few simple swirls to the cake. She stepped back, staring at her creation. It wasn't ugly, but it wasn't the masterpiece she'd planned. She felt a lump in her throat, the weight of her own expectations pressing down. She'd wanted this to be perfect for Mike, a symbol of her love, her effort. Now it felt like a compromise. As the first guests arrived, Mike's co-workers, a few neighbors, his brother Laura plastered on a smile, greeting them with practiced warmth. The backyard filled with chatter and laughter, the smell of grilling sliders mingling with the scent of freshly cut grass. Susan and Tom worked the crowd, their easy charm smoothing over any lingering tension. Amy stayed on the sidelines, helping refill drinks, but keeping her distance from the food table. Laura noticed, and a small part of her softened, though she wasn't ready to let go of her frustration. The real storm came when Laura stepped into the kitchen to grab the cake. Her parents followed, sensing her unease. "Laura, let's talk," Susan said, her voice gentle but firm. "We didn't mean for this to happen. We thought Amy could handle being here." Laura set the cake on the counter, her hands trembling. "That's the problem, Mom. You always think she can handle it, but you never actually help her. You let her do whatever she wants, and then I'm the one dealing with the consequences." Tom's face reddened, his patience wearing thin. "Laura, we're not her keepers. Amy's an adult. You can't blame us every time she makes a mistake." His words hit a nerve, and Laura's voice rose sharp and unsteady. "Maybe if you'd set some rules when we were kids, she wouldn't be like this. I've spent my whole life cleaning up after her, and I'm tired of it." The words poured out, years of unspoken resentment spilling into the open. Susan's eyes filled with tears, and Tom looked away, his jaw tight. Amy, who had slipped into the kitchen unnoticed, heard everything. Her face crumpled, and she stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Laura, I know I messed up, but you don't get to talk about me like I'm some broken thing you have to fix. I'm trying. Okay, I'm trying." Her words hung in the air, raw and honest, and for the first time Laura saw something new in her sister's eyes, not just guilt but determination. The doorbell rang, signaling more guests, and Laura forced herself to pull it together. She carried the cake to the patio, her heart heavy. The guests oohed and awed, unaware of the drama behind the scenes, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she'd failed. The cake with its sparse frosting was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. She glanced at Amy, who was standing alone by the drink table, and felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe she'd been too hard on her sister. Maybe she'd been too hard on herself. As the party hummed along, Laura faced a choice. She could hold on to her anger, let it taint the rest of the evening, or she could find a way to let go to salvage what mattered most. The answer wasn't clear, but as she watched Mike's brother light the grill and the guests laugh under the string lights, she knew she had to decide soon. The cake was just the beginning. The backyard of Laura and Mike's suburban Ohio home glowed under the soft twinkle of string lights, the hum of conversation blending with the classic rock playlist Laura had curated. The guests, Mike's co-workers, neighbors, and a few close friends, mingled around the patio, their laughter rising above the sizzle of sliders on the grill. To an outsider, the scene was perfect. A warm summer evening, a table laden with snacks, and the promise of a birthday celebration. But Laura felt like she was holding her breath, the weight of the day's events pressing against her chest. The cake, with its sparse layer of frosting and hastily piped swirls, sat on the table like a quiet rebuke. It wasn't the masterpiece she'd envisioned, and every glance at it reminded her of the argument that had fractured her family. Laura stood near the drink table, a plastic smile fixed on her face as she poured lemonade for a neighbor. Her eyes kept darting to Amy, who hovered at the edge of the crowd refilling ice buckets with a quiet focus. Amy hadn't touched the food since returning from the store, and Laura noticed the effort it took her sister's hands fidgeting, her gaze deliberately avoiding the bowl of guacamole. Part of Laura wanted to acknowledge it, to say something kind, but the sting of their earlier confrontation held her back. She was still angry at Amy, at her parents, at herself for letting this day spiral out of control. Inside, Susan and Tom were in the kitchen, ostensibly tidying up, but clearly avoiding the tension outside. Laura could see them through the sliding glass door, their heads bent in conversation, their expressions heavy. She knew they were hurt by her words, by the way she'd laid bare years of frustration. But she wasn't ready to apologize, not yet. The cake wasn't just a cake, it was a symbol of her effort, her love for Mike, and her need to prove she could get things right. And now it felt like a failure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mike's brother Dan called out from the grill. "All right, folks, sliders are ready. Let's get this party started." The guests cheered, gathering around the food table, and Laura knew the moment was coming. Mike would be home any minute, and it was time to bring out the cake. Her stomach churned as she slipped into the kitchen, where Susan was wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. "Mom, can you help me with the candles?" Laura asked, her voice softer than before. Susan nodded, setting down the sponge. "Of course, honey." There was a hesitancy in her tone, a crack in their usual warmth, but she followed Laura to the counter where the cake waited. Tom joined them, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "Looks good, Laura," he said, his voice gruff but encouraging. Laura managed a tight smile. "It's not what I planned, but it'll do." She placed 28 candles around the cake's edge, their wicks stark against the thin frosting. As she lit them, the glow cast flickering shadows across the kitchen, softening the harsh edges of the day. Susan touched her arm lightly. "Laura, about earlier. We didn't mean to make things harder. We just want Amy to feel included." Laura's jaw tightened, but she nodded, not trusting herself to respond. She wasn't ready to let go of her anger, but she didn't want to ruin Mike's moment. The sound of tires on the gravel driveway cut through the chatter outside. "He's here," Dan shouted, and the guests scrambled to their positions, hushing each other with excited grins. Laura carried the cake to the patio, her heart pounding. Amy stepped forward, hesitating, then took a spot near the back, her eyes fixed on the ground. Laura noticed, but said nothing, focusing on the task at hand. As Mike's footsteps approached, the crowd fell silent, and Laura held the cake steady, the candles flickering in the evening breeze. "Surprise!" The shout erupted as Mike stepped through the gate, his face breaking into a wide grin. He laughed, running a hand through his dark hair, his eyes sparkling with delight. "You guys," he said, shaking his head as he took in the decorations, the food and the glowing cake in Laura's hands. "This is incredible." He crossed the patio to Laura, pulling her into a hug, careful not to disturb the cake. "You're amazing," he whispered, and Laura felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to believe him, but the cake felt like a lie. As the guests sang happy birthday, their voices off-key but enthusiastic, Laura set the cake on the table. Mike blew out the candles, the crowd cheering. But Laura's eyes were drawn to Amy, who stood apart, her expression a mix of pride and guilt. Before Laura could process it, Amy stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Can I say something?" she asked, her hands trembling but her tone steady. The guests quieted, curious, and Laura's heart skipped a beat. What was Amy doing? Amy took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Laura. "I know this is Mike's day, but I need to say this. Laura worked so hard to make this party perfect, especially the cake. And I messed it up." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. I ate half the frosting she made, and I know it ruined her plans. I didn't mean to, but that doesn't make it okay. I'm sorry, Laura, and I'm going to do better. I promise." The backyard fell silent, the guests shifting uncomfortably, unsure how to react. Laura's breath caught her anger warring with a sudden rush of empathy. Amy's words were raw, unguarded, and for the first time Laura saw her sister not as a problem to be managed, but as someone trying to change. Mike, sensing the tension, stepped forward, his arm around Laura's waist. "Amy, thank you for saying that," he said, his voice warm. "But this cake, it's perfect. Because Laura made it, and because we're all here together." Laura's eyes stung, and she looked at the cake, its simple swirls glowing under the string lights. It wasn't the masterpiece she'd planned, but Mike's words echoed in her mind. Maybe it didn't need to be perfect. Maybe it was enough that they were here trying. She took a shaky breath and turned to Amy. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For trying. And for going to the store. It means a lot." Amy's face lit up, a tentative smile breaking through her tears. The guests, sensing the moment had passed, began to clap, their enthusiasm breaking the tension. Dan started slicing the cake, passing out plates, as the party resumed its lively hum. Laura felt Mike's hand squeeze hers, and she leaned into him, the weight of the day lifting slightly. As the evening wound down, Laura found herself alone with her parents in the kitchen, cleaning up the last of the dishes. Susan dried a plate, her movements slow, her eyes distant. "Laura, we're sorry," she said finally. "We should have listened to you about Amy. And maybe you're right. We haven't always set the boundaries she needs. We thought we were helping her by being soft, but maybe we've made things harder." Tom nodded, his usual gruffness softened. "We'll do better. For Amy, and for you. Maybe it's time we talk to someone, a counselor or something, to help her with her eating, and to help us figure out how to support her." Laura looked at her parents, their faces etched with regret, and felt a flicker of hope. They weren't perfect, but they were trying, just like Amy, just like her. "I'm sorry too," Laura said, her voice quiet. "I was hard on you guys. And on Amy. I wanted everything to be perfect for Mike." Susan reached out, pulling Laura into a hug. "You did good, sweetheart." Mike's smile said it all. Tom clapped a hand on Laura's shoulder, his way of saying he agreed. Later, as the last guests left and the backyard grew quiet, Laura and Mike sat on the patio, sharing a leftover slice of cake. The night air was cool, the stars bright above the maple trees. "This was the best birthday," Mike said, his fork scraping the plate. "Not because of the cake, though, it's delicious, but because of you. And your family. You all showed up, even with the mess." Laura smiled, her heart lighter than it had been all day. "It wasn't what I planned," she admitted. "But maybe that's okay." Mike leaned over, kissing her forehead. "It's more than okay." Across the yard, Amy was helping Susan gather the last of the decorations, her movements purposeful. Laura watched her sister, noticing the way she squared her shoulders, the determination in her eyes. It wouldn't be easy change, never was, but Amy was taking the first steps. And Laura knew she'd be there not to fix her sister, but to support her. As the night drew to a close, Laura stood in the quiet kitchen, the dishes done, the house still. She thought about the day, the arguments, the tears, the unexpected moments of grace. The cake hadn't been perfect, but it had brought them together, cracks and all. In her mind, she heard her own voice, soft and certain. "Sometimes the cracks in the cake let the light shine through."